Okay, so now the question is, once we've stored all of that information, how do we get it back out? So that brings us to retrieval, which is the act of getting information out of memory storage and back into conscious awareness. So this is something that we need every single day, and it's really what allows us to function. It's how we know how to direct to work and how we know how to do our job once we get there. We are constantly retrieving that information. Now, sometimes we can remember information without any help at all. Other times we might need reminders, and these reminders are called retrieval cues. So stimuli or basically small reminders that help us remember information or retrieve stored information. So you might have noticed, for example, that I only put a small amount of information on each slide. My main goal when I was teaching this in class was to make sure you're focusing on the extra information I'm giving you rather than just trying to write everything down and missing all of the extra stuff that I say. But I provide you with the key words so that when you go back and you're looking through your notes and you're studying, these act as retrieval cues to remind you of what we talked about. And then obviously, hopefully you're adding extra notes to this. But they're there to act as retrieval cues. Now, there are three ways to retrieve information: recall, recognition, and relearning. So recall is being able to access information without any retrieval cues. So for example, on an essay test or a fill in the blank or short answer test, there aren't any retrieval cues there to tell you the answer. You have to recall the information needed from storage, right? On the other hand, recognition is being able to identify information that you have previously learned after encountering it again. So basically, you're recognizing something you've already seen. Are you able to remember that you've seen that before? So the best example of this would be a multiple choice exam. This is much, much easier than an essay or a fill in the blank because the answer is in front of you. You've seen it before. The question is, do you recognize the answer? Do you recognize that you've seen this before? So it's going to be much easier. Then we have relearning, which is learning information that you've previously learned. And so you might be wondering, well, how is this a form of retrieval? Well, let's say, like me, you learned French as a kid. I learned it from about, I don't know, I was probably about 9 years old until I was 16. I learned a lot of French. And I've never had to use it since. I've been to France many, many times since then, and I've never really needed to use it. And so I don't remember it. I remember a few things. However, if I was to try to relearn it, I would learn it much faster this time than the first time because that information is still there. That knowledge of French is still stored away somewhere very deeply, but it has faded over time. And so if I start relearning, that in a sense, I'm retrieving that, or essentially what's happening is I'm retrieving that information that I'd already learned, and that's why it's much faster. Okay, so relearning is a form of retrieval. You're accessing that information that has just faded over time. So if I show you this, and I ask you, what are the names of the 7 dwarfs? This is a test of recall because there aren't any retrieval cues. Technically, you could use their faces as an idea, but other than that, there aren't any retrieval cues to tell you what the names are. You would have to just recall them from memory. On the other hand, if I show you this, and I ask you what are the names of the 7 dwarfs, this should make it a lot easier because now it is a test of recognition. The answers are there in front of you, but do you recognize them? And in case you're curious and you're trying really hard to remember right now, they are Sneezy, Doc, Happy, Bashful, Grumpy, Sleepy, and Dopey, I believe. So something that you will be tested on the exam is the encoding specificity principle. So this is the belief that retrieval is more successful when cues available during recall are similar to those that were present when the information was being encoded and stored. Basically, you are going to be able to retrieve information much easier if the environment or the state that you're in at the time of trying to remember is the same as the environment or the state that you were in at the time of learning the information. So there's 2 parts to this. There is the context-dependent memory effect and the state-dependent memory effect. Context dependent is referring to the environment. So whether or not your environment is the same. So if, for example, right now you are learning all of the information for this class sitting in your bed on your laptop, when you come to take the exam, your best option is to take that in the same place, to be in bed on your laptop taking the exam. If you're sitting at a desk doing it, then that's the best place for you to take the exam. The point is, the more similar the environment is as you're recalling the information, the more likely you are to remember the information. So keeping the environment the same. State-dependent memory effect is referring to your personal state. So, for example, the emotional state that you're in. Think about, when you're in a really bad mood, or you're feeling upset, or you're angry, you tend to be more likely to remember all of the other situations that have led you to feel that way. Whereas when you're in a good mood, you're more likely to remember positive experiences. This would also apply to things like, let's say, as you are learning information, you chew a certain flavored gum. This theory would suggest if you chew that same flavored gum as you are being tested, you'll be more likely to remember. Or you could try using a certain smell, wear a certain perfume or deodorant or something as you're learning, and if you can smell the same thing as you're being tested, the idea is that you'll be more likely to remember it. Now, the main thing that I'm going to test you on the exam is this study by Godin and Badelli in 1975, which offers support for this theory. Basically, they wanted to study the effect of environment and retrieval cues on recall. And so they had divers, they took a group of divers, and they had them learn a list of words on land or underwater. And they then had to recall the words in both conditions, so both on land and underwater. What they found was that recall was better when the learning environment and the recall environment were the same. So if they learned the list of words underwater, they performed better on a recall test underwater. If they learned the list of words on land, they performed better on land. So that is offering support for this idea that we can remember things, we can retrieve information much better when the environmental cues are the same as when we learn the information.